Egypt makes $10 billion every single year on a canal it did not build, with money it did not spend, using technology that French engineers designed in the 19th century. For 150 years, every ship that wanted to move between Asia and Europe had no choice but to pay Egypt for the privilege of using a ditch dug through its desert. No competition, no alternative, no negotiation. You pay or you go around Africa and add 3 weeks to your journey. That monopoly is about to end, and the country that is going to break it is Israel, with a railway through the Negev desert, and $20 billion it does not yet have. Here is the paradox that makes this story worth paying attention to. Israel is a country the size of New Jersey. It has no major rivers, no deep natural harbor on its Mediterranean coast. Its southern port of Eilat sits at the very tip of a narrow finger of the Red Sea, squeezed between Jordan on one side and Saudi Arabia on the other. For most of its existence, Eilat was a backwater. Beach hotels, coral reefs, recreational diving. Not a serious logistics hub by any measure. But Eilat sits on a geographic coordinate that is suddenly worth more than almost any other point on the map. It is the first port north of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where ships can dock without entering the range of Houthi missiles being fired from Yemen. That one fact, that single geographic accident, has turned a tourist town into the centerpiece of the most ambitious trade infrastructure project in the Middle East since the Suez Canal itself was built. To understand what Israel is actually proposing, you need to picture the physical scale of what building this would require. Stand in Eilat and look north. The Negev desert stretches in front of you for 300 kilometers of rock, sand, and heat that regularly reaches 50 degrees Celsius in summer. At the other end of that desert sits Ashdod, Israel's main Mediterranean port. 2 coastlines, 2 seas, 300 kilometers of some of the most difficult terrain in the region between them. The plan connects them with a freight railway, not a passenger line, a heavy industrial railway capable of carrying the same containers that currently travel through the Suez Canal. A container ship arrives at Eilat from Asia. Cranes lift the containers off the deck. Each container weighs up to 30 tons when loaded, the equivalent of stacking 5 fully grown elephants inside a metal box. The containers are loaded onto trains. Those trains cross the Negev in approximately 4 hours. At Ashdod, they transfer onto ships heading to European ports. The entire crossing takes less time than a transatlantic flight. The Israeli government calls this the Med-Red Corridor. The current cost estimate is $20 billion. To put that number in physical terms, $20 billion is roughly what it costs to build 5 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Israel is proposing to spend the equivalent of an entire naval superpower's shipbuilding budget on a railway through a desert. Now here is the economic logic that transforms this from an engineering curiosity into a genuine threat to Egyptian interests. The Suez Canal currently generates approximately $10 billion per year in toll revenue for Egypt. That revenue is not optional for the Egyptian government. It represents roughly 2% of Egypt's entire GDP and is one of the country's largest single sources of foreign currency. When the canal earns less, Egypt's ability to service its national debt, which currently stands at a level that has required multiple International Monetary Fund bailouts, becomes more precarious. In 2023, Egypt raised Suez Canal transit fees by 15%. Not because the canal improved, not because the service got better, because Egypt could, because there was no alternative. Shipping companies absorbed the increase and passed it to their customers, which means it reached you, invisibly, in the price of everything that traveled through that canal. The Med-Red Corridor is designed to create an alternative for the first time in 150 years. If Israel can offer competitive transit fees, shipping companies gain negotiating leverage they have never had. They do not need to switch to the Israeli route entirely. They simply need the option to switch. That option alone forces Egypt to compete on price for the first time since 1869. For a country already in financial difficulty, losing even 15% of canal revenue would be a serious economic crisis. But here is the moment where the story stops being about Israel and Egypt and becomes something much larger. The company most aggressively interested in the Med-Red Corridor is not Israeli. It is not American. It is DP World, a port operating company headquartered in Dubai, owned by the government of the UAE, that currently manages terminals in over 80 ports across 40 countries. Rotterdam, London Gateway, Jebel Ali, Santos in Brazil, Berbera in Somalia. If there is a strategically significant port on the planet, DP World is either already there or trying to get there. DP World was founded in 2005 as a spin-off from the Dubai Ports Authority. Today it generates revenues of over $10 billion annually. It is not a shipping company. It does not own the cargo. It owns the infrastructure that handles the cargo, the cranes, the terminals, the logistics systems. It is the landlord of global trade. And like any landlord, its power comes from owning property that tenants cannot operate without. DP World has been in active discussions about investing in the expansion of Eilat Port since 2021, following the Abraham Accords normalization between the UAE and Israel. The logic from Dubai's perspective is straightforward and worth saying directly. DP World operates terminals in the Red Sea region, including the port of Jebel Ali, which sits inside Houthi missile range. Every day that the Houthi campaign continues, DP World's regional business faces elevated risk. Eilat is a Red Sea-adjacent port protected by the most battle-tested missile defense system on the planet. Israel's Iron Dome and David's Sling systems have intercepted the majority of projectiles fired at Israeli territory, including Houthi ballistic missiles aimed at Eilat. What DP World is effectively purchasing through its investment in Eilat is not just a port terminal. It is access to Israeli missile defense as a commercial infrastructure asset. Dubai is buying military protection as a business expense. And it is doing so through a normalization agreement that 3 years ago would have been politically unthinkable. This is the moment where you realize this story is not really about a railway. It is about the Abraham Accords quietly reshaping the physical infrastructure of the Middle East in ways that nobody fully anticipated when those agreements were signed. Now here is the part that should make you genuinely uncomfortable, because the threats to this project are not hypothetical. On October 31st, 2023, Houthi forces fired a salvo of ballistic missiles and drones toward Eilat. Israeli defense systems intercepted the incoming projectiles. No significant damage was reported, but the port of Eilat suspended commercial operations for a period following the attack. Shipping companies that had vessels scheduled to call at Eilat rerouted them. The cranes stood idle. The tourist hotels emptied. And the fundamental vulnerability of the entire Med-Red concept was exposed in a single night. The corridor only works if Eilat is reliably open. Reliably open means reliably defended. And reliable defense against an adversary that can manufacture cheap attack drones faster than Israel can manufacture expensive interceptor missiles is not guaranteed. Each interceptor missile costs between $50,000 and $1 million depending on the system used. Each Houthi drone costs approximately $2,000 to build. The mathematics of sustained missile defense against high-volume cheap drone attacks is a problem that no defense system in the world has fully solved. Beyond the security problem, there is the financial reality of what $20 billion actually means for a country of 9 million people in the middle of an active regional conflict. Infrastructure projects at this scale and complexity almost never come in on budget. The facts here are documented and consistent across every comparable project in history. The Channel Tunnel between England and France was budgeted at £3 billion and cost $15 billion. The Boston Big Dig Highway project was estimated at $2.5 billion and cost $24 billion. The Crossrail project in London was supposed to cost £15 billion and cost $19 billion. These were projects built in stable, peaceful, wealthy countries with experienced construction industries and no active security threats. The Med-Red corridor must be built across 300 kilometers of desert, in a country currently engaged in active military conflict on multiple fronts, with a timeline that the Red Sea crisis is making urgent, at a moment when Israel's defense spending has increased dramatically and its access to international capital markets has become more complicated. The $20 billion estimate is almost certainly not the final number, and every billion over budget is a billion that must come from somewhere in an economy already under significant strain. China is watching all of this with precise attention. Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative has invested heavily in port infrastructure throughout the Middle East, East Africa, and Southern Europe. The port of Haifa in northern Israel received significant investment from the Shanghai International Port Group, which began operating a terminal there in 2021. That investment gave China a commercial presence in an Israeli port. The Med-Red Corridor, if successful, creates a trade route running from the Red Sea through Israel to the Mediterranean that bypasses Egyptian infrastructure, reduces the strategic value of Chinese port investments along the traditional Suez route, and runs entirely through territory aligned with the United States and its Gulf partners. Beijing has not been subtle about its concern. Chinese state media has characterized the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor, of which the Med-Red Railway is a central component, as an American attempt to build a parallel trade architecture designed to reduce Chinese infrastructure leverage in the region. That characterization is accurate. Washington has explicitly promoted the corridor as part of a strategy to connect democratic and aligned economies through infrastructure that does not depend on Chinese-built or Chinese-operated systems. This railway is a geopolitical document written in concrete and steel, and sitting at the center of it all, in a modest government building in Jerusalem, are Israeli transportation planners who are attempting to do something that no country their size has ever attempted: transform a small, conflict-surrounded nation into an indispensable node in the global supply chain. Make Israel so economically necessary to European and Asian trade that its security becomes a matter of direct economic interest to every major economy on the planet. The strategic logic is elegant. If the goods that European consumers buy from Asian factories travel through Israeli infrastructure, then a disruption to Israeli security is simultaneously a disruption to European supply chains. That creates a form of economic deterrence that supplements military deterrence. Countries do not attack infrastructure they depend on, or at least they calculate the cost of doing so very differently. Whether that logic survives contact with the actual security environment of the Middle East is the $20 billion question. There is a shipping company in Singapore right now running the numbers on this. Looking at a map, the Suez route is available but expensive and has been disrupted twice in 5 years. The Cape of Good Hope route is safe but costs 3 additional weeks of fuel and crew time. The Med-Red route does not yet exist, but the projections say it could be operational by 2030 if funding is secured and construction begins within the next 18 months. The Suez Canal took 10 years to build. It changed global trade for 150 years. Egypt has collected rent on that decision for longer than most countries have existed in their current form. Israel is betting $20 billion that it can do the same thing, through a desert, during a war, against a deadline that the missiles flying over the Red Sea are setting whether Israel is ready or not. What do you think? Is the Med-Red Corridor the most important infrastructure project of the 21st century? Or is Israel building a $20 billion railway through a desert that the moment regional stability returns, nobody will need? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to understand the Houthi missile campaign that is making all of this suddenly urgent, that video is already waiting for you.